Very excited tonight to welcome our author with this wonderful book. Simon & Schuster published it. It was a great story that Kirk's Reviews called it a well-researched report on Twitter's calamitous year. Matt Levine of Bloomberg Opinion wrote, Zoe Schiffer has written the definitive book on perhaps the weirdest business story of our time. A fast-paced and riveting account of a hilarious and tragic mess, which is an understatement, I think. To give Zoe a proper introduction, we please welcome Annie Kahane. She's a performing arts instructor at UCLA who is blessed with numerous talents, including dance and poetry. Correct? Am I right?
You are.
All right. Well, welcome, Zoe, and please introduce our speaker.
Thank you for the intro, and thanks for having us. As I think 99.9% of us know, this is Zoe Schiffer. She's an investigative reporter and mom and local to Santa Barbara, and we're celebrating the release of her first book. I actually just had an idea for a first question that's not on my list, which is, how much were you involved in the cover design?
Oh, that's a good question. Technically, I didn't have control over it, but they gave me 3 options, 2 of which looked really cartoony, and I felt like women never get the definitive looking book on a topic, and this is a book or a topic that will have many different books, so I wanted to be the serious looking one.
Got it. Okay, so on a more serious note, my first thought reading the book, my first question is about the structure and the form. So you had all these pieces of reporting, and then you have the opportunity to do the book-length project. How did you approach deciding how to pull it all together, how to tell the story, what story to tell?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if people in the back can't hear, just raise your hand and we'll try and be louder. I started writing the book in March of 23, and at that point I didn't know what the ending was going to be because he'd only purchased the company a few months earlier and it was unfolding really rapidly. But by the time I signed the contract, I was already really late on the book writing process. There had been 5 other Twitter books sold, and so it was now or never. And I knew that I wanted to tell a story that was primarily about people, and I had an idea in my head of telling it through the perspective of someone who had real reservations about Elon Musk as a person, but was staying because they essentially had to. And I had one particular person in mind. We can go into more on the characters and the sourcing. And then I wanted to tell a different perspective, which was that there were a lot of people at the company who were really excited about him and thought he was a visionary and a genius and believed what he was saying in terms of bringing free speech to the public town square and kind of revitalizing democracy, supposedly. And so I wanted to explore both of those. And I felt like if I was telling a human story, then I would kind of follow their trajectories, and however it played out for them would be kind of the arc of the book overall.
Got it. And let's just follow it. Who are those people? Who are those main characters?
Yeah, so the person that I knew from the beginning I really wanted to be involved was this man named J.P. Doherty. He was a dad. He has 2 kids with special needs, and he was staying at the company because his son needed this very serious surgery in January of 23, and he needed his health care, so he couldn't leave the company. And he was kind of swiftly rising up the ranks under Elon Musk and felt really morally conflicted about it. He felt like his colleagues were getting fired left and right. The decisions that Elon Musk was making was having really negative implications for democracy around the world. And yet Elon Musk really trusted him and started texting him on Signal all the time and was kind of bringing him into his inner circle. And when I met him, I felt like he was just a really stand-up person. He was trustworthy, and he wasn't one of those people who was reflexively anti-Elon Musk, which was going to be kind of too easy of a perspective and also something that would turn, I thought, a lot of people off immediately from the book. So I wanted him involved, and it was just a matter of figuring out how to do that in a way that wouldn't put him in a really dangerous position. And then the other character was always going to be the harder one to find, because there were a lot of people at the company who, as I said before, believed in Elon Musk, felt like Twitter kind of 1.0, so Twitter before Elon Musk took over was really slow and bureaucratic. they felt annoyed with all of the content moderation. So basically all the things that Elon felt were problematic, they agreed with. But all of those people like hated me and didn't want to talk to me. And so even if they'd become kind of disenchanted, it was really complicated for me to access them. And I'd heard the name of this one young engineer who, similarly to JP, had really risen up the ranks really, really fast, gotten really close to Elon Musk, and was being staffed on all of his top projects. And in March, when I was deciding to start writing the book, I got a text from a couple different sources that said, this guy, Randall Lynn, has been fired. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should reach out, but I didn't do anything immediately. And it just so happened that kind of in the days when I was figuring out if I had a story and could sign this book contract, he actually called me, and it turned out that he'd been fired supposedly for leaking information to me, although we'd never spoken. Someone had kind of thrown him under the bus and blamed a bunch of stories that I'd been writing on him, and he was really freaked out and was contacting me basically to say, why do they think this? Did you say something, like, why, can you help clear my name? And I was like, I can't really get involved on that level, but I am thinking about this project, and I think, well, obviously it's beneficial to me if you're involved. It also gives you a chance to tell your story, and eventually he agreed, and at that point I knew I had a book that I could write.
Wow. So interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of us who aren't as interested in Musk or the tech sector, we'll find that the story is actually just really interesting because it's about people, and we have a great storyteller. But I just want to follow a little bit where you're going already, which is how you cultivate the relationships with these sources, because I noticed one of the press pieces that I read, or maybe it was Kara Swisher, said, like, you have this particular capacity to get the scoop. You're like a really scoopy reporter. So I'm just curious, like, why do you think that is?
Well, with Twitter in particular, it wasn't like particularly hard to get the scoop for a while because people were not very loyal to Elon Musk because he was treating people really, really poorly. So there was like an early phase of the reporting where I would wake up every day and my phone was like blowing up with texts and documents. It was like a dream. And that ended because he fired everyone really fast. But I think I just legitimately care about people. I always feel like I won't do a story if it's going to put someone in a bad position. And then on a practical note, I always start talking to people completely off the record, and I feel like that puts the power in the hands of the source. So often in a dynamic with a reporter, the journalist has all of the power. They get to decide what to tell, when to tell it, how the story is going to be told, and I think that that's problematic in certain ways, especially when the power balance that you're talking about at the company is so squarely in the hands of Elon Musk. You're asking someone to go out on a limb and not necessarily protecting them. So I always felt like my first goal was to make sure that my sources were safe and to tell a story that was true and accurate, but wouldn't jeopardize their livelihood or their lives. And again, I think in some ways a lot of the decisions that Elon Musk made ended up being really beneficial to me. He refused to pay people severance, for example. That meant that a lot of people didn't sign non-disclosure agreements. And so there were kind of practical ways in which he shot himself in the foot a little bit and allowed people to talk to me for months on end.
Which is kind of ironic because he hates the press.
Yeah.
So are there any stories that started off the record that you really wish you could have told? Like, I mean, you don't have to disclose if you can, but like people who said, like, I can't.
Oh, there were so many great stories of like individuals who it just was never going to be particularly safe for them to go on the record, and so we had to kind of keep it. And there's like a couple people in the book. Most everyone in the book is on the record, and there's one or two people who use pseudonyms, and that's for that reason. But yeah, I mean, there were also like rumors that I had heard that seemed really juicy and would have been great for the book that I wasn't able to nail. One of the obvious ones is that now reporting has come out that suggests that Elon Musk does a lot of drugs, and I had heard from employees like, you know, his behavior is really weird. He's pacing around the office at 3 a.m. He's grinding his teeth. He's tweeting all these things. He says things that don't make sense, and I was like, that doesn't sound like Red Bull to me. That sounds like something else. But it was all speculative, and so it wasn't something that I was able to put in. And then in the weeks that followed, the Wall Street Journal came out with some big investigative work on that, and also how it impacts his businesses. And yeah, unfortunately, it's probably good for the world that the Wall Street Journal did it, but unfortunate for my book.
Interesting. So, okay, getting a little bit less scoop focused. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about the content moderation stuff because I feel like we've talked about this before you had this book deal, just in terms of like, do we want the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world deciding what is hate speech, or even the people that they employ? Do we really want these billionaires to be the ones deciding? And then at the same time, if there's no moderation, then is the internet a free-for-all for harassment and hate speech? But I'm curious, like, what your personal opinion is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really does depend on kind of where in the infrastructure stack you are as a company. I think if you're Cloudflare and you're like really a pure infrastructure company, we don't want them weighing in on content moderation that much. But if you're Twitter and you're actually making stuff go viral, you're elevating certain accounts and suppressing others, then I do think you have to moderate content. And the other thing that Elon Musk, I think, failed to grasp in kind of a fundamental way is that content moderation is a product, and it's a product you sell to advertisers. Twitter's business is about 90% based on advertising revenue, and advertisers don't want a free-for-all. They don't want endless free speech. They want to pay money and have their ad show up next to an innocuous tweet from a sports star, a celebrity, not like a nude image of someone or hate speech. And it's kind of the same for regular people. I think no matter how much you talk about the merits of free speech absolutism, at the end of the day, most users need some level of content moderation because it actually protects free speech for the masses. It allows people to speak without being harassed or targeted or shunted off the platform completely. And so I think we see kind of people in positions of immense power who haven't dealt with these types of issues come in and say, I'm a free speech absolutist, and then they all tend to end up in the same place because no one can be. You have regulators, you have app stores, you have advertisers, and you have regular users, and all of them want some level of content moderation.
So, and where is Musk now? Is he holding strong about this?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, and then in other ways, I think his vision of free speech, or his definition of that, has totally crumbled. He's banned journalists who have been critical of him. He, at a rate far higher than Twitter's former leadership, has caved to authoritarian leaders in other countries when they've asked him to block certain content. And we've kind of seen that his definition of speech or free speech is one that, you know, is specific to him. It's the kind of speech that he is okay with, and speech that he's not okay with tends to get kicked off the platform, just like before. So spooky.
And he did not comment, right?
No, he texted me back once and just said the crying, laughing emoji when I asked him to talk. So
What would you ask him if you could ask him something?
I've thought about that because I did, you know, he's very erratic. So I was like, maybe he'll respond, or maybe he'll just call me out of the blue. But that didn't happen. I think I'm curious what he thinks he did wrong, like what his missteps were. I think there have been moments where it really felt like there was a turning point in his behavior. One prominent one was he'd been really supportive of Yoel Roth, the former head of trust and safety at Twitter. And then when Yoel resigned because of decisions that Elon Musk was making, Elon went after him and insinuated that he was a pedophile. And Yoel had to sell his house and go into hiding. And, you know, I think I'm curious now, does he look back at that moment as a mistake, a point where he turned even some of his supporters away from him, or does he stand by it? When he was kicking journalists off and then he eventually had to bring those accounts back, does he feel like that was a misstep, or is he, you know, we know he's surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear, and so it's hard to gauge whether he has an accurate reading of his own mistakes.
Right. And I'm sure people ask this all the time, but also about Elon Musk himself. Are you ever, I mean, I know you were sued early on in your career by someone super powerful. I'm pretty sure it was the same person who represented Trump. Sort of.
They almost filed and then they didn't file, yeah.
So, like, are you afraid of legal action?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I don't want to get sued by the richest person in the world, and I do have, or it's just something I think about a lot, because the lawsuit that you're referring to didn't go through, but you know, you're inundated with legal letters. They're telling you they're going to take you to court. It's hard as a journalist to know how you're going to be protected by a publication. I'm an independent journalist now, so I have even fewer protections. And, we've seen journalists, there's a journalist right now who's in jail because of, or was arrested because of reporting that he did, and he's being persecuted under a law that doesn't really make sense. And so I think the country is changing, and yeah, it's certainly something that scares me. And at the same time, my sources are taking a huge risk in speaking out, and I feel like if they're doing it and putting their livelihoods and their safety on the line, especially when they were close to this person who might see them and might have more of a vendetta, then I can certainly take that risk as well.
I'm gonna turn it to the right just a little bit. Yeah. So, at the beginning of the book, you talk about how Twitter's not a profitable business. Jack Dorsey is a very absent CEO. And I'm just wondering, and I don't know if you'll have an answer, but is it a little bit like, getting elected in the middle of COVID-19 where like whoever the CEO would have been, it would have been really hard?
No, I mean, I think there were so many unforced errors that Elon Musk made specifically. I think Twitter was not like the best business. It lagged behind its competitors in terms of growth and revenue, but it also wasn't in a terrible spot. And the platform had made huge strides to try and be thoughtful in how it moderated content, to try and be a responsible partner when it was playing a big part in elections around the world. And so it needed to kind of turbocharge its like advertising business. I think it needed to do more with influencers and creators, but I don't think it needed the changes that Elon Musk thought it needed. And that's been borne out in the fact that the company has just been hemorrhaging money since he came on board.
And you no longer use it, is that right?
No, I decided when Elon started targeting Yoel, that was a moment for me where I felt like something really different was happening on the platform versus other tech platforms. And so I thought about stopping at that point. I had a big platform that had grown, while I was reporting to like 100,000 followers. And so it was a scary thing to think about walking away from because it's many magnitudes larger than the voice that I have anywhere else. But when he started elevating misinformation and really going head to head with the mainstream press and calling journalists all sorts of things, he was discrediting what I was doing as a profession. I felt like staying on the platform was validating what he was doing. It was legitimizing his entire project with Twitter, and so that didn't feel like something I could support anymore. So I haven't used it since November of last year.
And are your colleagues also switching?
My closest colleague that I work with, Casey Newton, he and I made that decision together. It's recently become more painful with the book, but I'm staying strong. It's like I hop back on to sell books. I have no moral fiber. So, but I am surprised every time I do go on to just like see what other people are talking about. I'm honestly shocked with how many journalists are still on there, and I think most of all because they seem to get zero traction because of the changes he's made to the algorithm. So I'm like, not only are you continuing to participate in this very rigged game, but it's like for what? So yeah, I don't understand.
How are you doing on time?
Good.
Okay, so from like I have like a couple creative-ish questions. What, having not written a book-length project before, what are you gonna take from the process of doing this into the next one? What did you learn?
Well, actually, something you had told me when you were doing your creative residency in Santa Barbara really stuck with me, which was that Annie is an artist and was staying with us while she was doing a residency here and said, I like wanted to go on a walk or something in the morning. You were like, no, I need a lot of spaciousness in the morning. Like I can't engage with other things because I need to be able to go into my day and really focus. And I think that was a big thing, just being able to not try and work on something else in the morning and then squeeze in a couple hours of writing and then switch to another thing. Like I needed to just dedicate basically my whole day, every day to it. Andrew my husband watched Ava, our daughter, on Saturdays and Sundays, and so I basically worked 7 days a week for the whole summer, and that really just gave me like focused time to completely immerse myself in the project, which I felt like was really helpful because I knew what I needed to do to meet the deadline and meet the goal, and I was just able to give it my all for that period of time.
since we are like a family and friends crowd, and you brought up your family, I feel like as women who are also professionals, there's often this like idea of having it all, like, oh, I can have children and have an amazing career, and here's like an example of someone who's doing it, and it's, you know, we're close friends, so it's like, you see it close up, you're like, it's not easy. Can you talk a little bit about it for the viewers on YouTube later?
I mean, I think I've just had to make a lot of compromises on how I thought I was going to do things. Like, I was not raised without TV. Ava watches TV. My mom like made all of our snacks from scratch. Ava gets store-bought snacks. It's like, I think I had to kind of just let go of a lot of the like vision of how I was going to parent and be like, this is just how it is right now. But it's also just really hard. I'll say that. Like, it's not been an easy experience.
Cool. For the kids at home. Okay, so back to the book though. Oh shoot, did I just lose my train of thought and might have to actually refer to my notes? No. I think what my question was good. Oh, I remember it. It's, so part of why you were pushing so hard with the deadline, making all those sacrifices, you mentioned the 5 other Twitter books. I know you were kind of racing the clock. So I'm curious, knowing there are other journalists who are also writing books about this Twitter thing and Elon Musk, is it competitive? Is it generous? Do you share information?
No.
What is that like?
It was really competitive. It was a weird, like, cat and mouse game, I think, for all of us, because we started out as like friends, and I think we still are. But it was like, you know, we are all racing towards this deadline, and being first is a really big deal in my industry. You know, my book came out within a week of another Twitter book, Kurt Wagner's right there, who's really great, and we kind of decided at the end that because our books were coming out so close together, we would kind of join forces. I actually interviewed him, and we kind of interviewed each other about our books for one publication. We've done a couple podcasts together, and so we've kept it pretty friendly, which I think is impressive given that objectively we're like cannibalizing each other a little bit. But yeah, it's stressful and competitive. And I think for my next book project, I've actually thought of an idea recently, and I emailed a journalist who I knew was working on the topic and was like, are you writing a book? And he said yes, and I was like, great, I'm not gonna touch that. I don't want to go through this experience again. So next time I'm like, I don't want to race anyone else.
I'm gonna ask one follow-up and then we'll do audience, which is going back to my first question that was not about the cover. Is anything about what you chose to do related to this competition? Is there anything that you chose that you did because you knew I can do this and no one else can do that?
I think that is basically what, I mean, both because it's what I'm interested in terms of like stories of people, and also because I felt like if I tell a story that's about what it was like to fight for this company that you really believed in and have it kind of dismantled in front of your eyes, and was telling what it was like to be in the room for these moments and what it was like to go through it individually, then no matter what anyone else wrote, my story would be different. And I think that that's borne out. It's a much more character-driven book than Kurt's, and he's such an incredible business reporter, but I feel like in some ways they are complementary because they have really different angles.
Yeah, yeah. And you say at the beginning it's not a biography, so that differentiates it from the biographer as well.
Yeah.
Great. Would anybody like to ask a question from the crowd? Yeah.
Was there any tension with you and the publisher and your editor?
No, I ended up hiring a bunch of help myself because I realized early on that I don't have, you know, this is the first time I've published a book. Some of you in the audience might have more experience than me, but I realized early on that the publisher was kind of like, whatever, they were going to give me help and they were going to help promote it a lot, but they weren't going to give me a ton of support in the process. One just example of that is that I signed the contract in March and it wasn't supposed to be turned in until April of 24, and I was like, that's going to be way too late. If I get it done by October, could I try and be the first one? And they were like, you've never written a book before, so why don't you just get to writing and we'll chat later. And I was like, no. So I hired my editor from the Virgin New York magazine and a fact checker myself to kind of have a team around me who I knew would support. And I was worried at that point, like, is the publisher going to be offended because they have an editor assigned to the book? But we all worked really, really well together, and they were honestly awesome and super supportive.
I have a question. Zoe, since you're not using X anymore, what platforms do you use, and do you see some new platform rising up?
Yeah, I have been using Threads, which is Meta's Twitter competitor, and I feel like I have a good experience with that. It feels a lot like Twitter did. I think the future of the social web is decentralized. It's a new vision, and it's kind of hard to talk about because it is very techy, but it's a vision of social media where it functions more like email. You can sign up for any provider and talk to anyone else on any other platform, and you're not abandoning your whole following when you move from place to place. And so that's hard for us to grasp because we never lived in a world like that, but Threads and Blue Sky and Mastodon are all built with this underlying technology that will let you, it's called interoperability, like they'll let them talk to each other, and I think that's going to be a weird transition and hard to kind of grasp, but I think it ends up being better for all of us.
What's Linda Yaccarino's role at Twitter? She seems irrelevant to me.
Yeah, so Linda Yaccarino is now the CEO of Twitter, or X. When she came in, I was like, oh, that's the end of my book. It has a new CEO, and then it was so clear immediately that it was really no change at all. Elon Musk is still very much in charge. You know, I think her role is interesting. It really was a moment where Elon Musk was admitting that although he had tried to divest Twitter or X from advertisers, he actually was hiring someone whose entire job is to court advertisers. That's her role at NBC and the reason that he hired her. And she's done a pretty good job of that, despite the fact that he continues to scare advertisers away. We saw during the Super Bowl that they had a lot of big name brands back on the platform running ads. At the same time, during the Super Bowl, Elon Musk is tweeting about boobs, and so you have to imagine if you're Linda Yaccarino, you're not thrilled. Although by all accounts, she's still a true believer and totally behind him.
You seem to have a really great sense of humor, and I wonder if humor helped carry you through all this.
Thank you. That's the highest compliment that someone could give. It wasn't something I felt not humorous in the process. I felt like kind of depressed about the state of the world. But I do think there is, like, part of the story is objectively funny and silly, and the characters involved are just so ridiculous that I think highlighting that in the book, there was a fun aspect of that for me.
And the book is funny. Like, if you haven't read it, it feels like hanging out with Zoe, where you're kind of like, it's a very, you know, I'm an artist more than I'm a tech person at all, but there's a thing in writing where they talk about getting to the general through the specific, and I feel like the funniness of the story gets told through these little details where it's like you're not even really trying, it's just about how it's delivered so that the punchline really lands. So, I agree.
Is there going to be an audiobook?
There is an audiobook. Yeah, the publisher. In fact, weirdly, the audiobook has sold more books than it's been wildly popular. So kudos to the publisher because I had nothing to do with that.
Cool.
You didn't read it then.
No, they gave us the option, and when they showed me the options of people who could read it, I was like, these people seem way better at this than me, so I'm gonna let them do it. So, yeah.
Well, Zoe, thank you very much for coming. Her book, Extremely Hardcore Inside Elon Musk's Twitter, is available behind the counters. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Annie, for being a great moderator.